In the perilous primordial forest, these families live isolated from the world, relying on nature's bounty. They build cabins in the wilderness and sustain themselves through hunting. In the Montana Rockies, thousands once lived here, depending on hunting for their livelihood. Over the decades, only a few old hunters remain, with Tom being one of them. In his youth, yearning for a free life in the forest, he brought his wife Nancy here, where they've lived for over 30 years. Although the forest life is tough for Nancy, she stays by Tom's side as long as he enjoys it. Their children and grandchildren have urged the couple to return to the city, but stubborn Tom has always refused, preferring the forest life. With Montana's winter approaching, the couple now prepares for the 7-month-long season. They gather ample firewood and store enough vegetables, but hunting is crucial, as meat is their main sustenance through winter. Circling eagles signal the hunting season's start. Tom's neighbor Will has been a close friend for decades, and they hunt together annually. Today they scout the forest, rich in wildlife but also predators, including dangerous brown bears, especially active before hibernation. While hunting, they must be cautious of the bears, protected by law without a permit. Discovering abundant bear droppings indicates frequent bear activity, heightening their alertness. For safety, they decide to retreat. But Tom's beloved dog, Ellie, goes missing, increasing his urgency. Knowing the dog stands no chance against a bear, Tom searches deeper into the forest, risking more danger. Will considers retreating, but fortunately, Ellie returns unharmed, relieving Tom. Now, they must quickly leave this dangerous area as this year's snow arrives earlier, covering the world outside in a thick layer. Danger quietly approached against such a backdrop. At night, Ellie seemed to smell a formidable enemy and dashed outside, cursing. This frightened the elderly couple greatly. Using a flashlight, Tom spotted a brown bear nearby. Fortunately, Ellie wasn't foolish and didn't confront the bear, which seemed to realize its owner was not to be messed with, and disappeared into the night. The encounter left Tom's family shaken. At dawn, Tom began tracking the bear's trail, with Will coming over to help. From the previous night's footprints, they could tell the bear was large. Tom theorized that the bear's keen sense of smell had drawn it here, indicating nearby prey. They then decided to intercept the bear's potential prey. Will clanged antlers together, a sound that attracts male deer, thinking they are hearing rivals fighting. Tom hid nearby, ready to shoot. However, the plan was unsuccessful, and they spent a lonely day. Meanwhile, Nancy, staying at home, took precautions against a bear visit by locking all doors and installing an electric fence outside the pigeon house, ensuring maximum defense. As darkness fell, Tom had not yet returned, worrying Nancy since nights are much more dangerous. The profession of a hunter is indeed lucrative, allowing for luxurious means like airplanes. A man named Maddie, an experienced fur hunter, thrives during Alaska's winter. Living deep in the mountains, he leaves his family each hunting season to travel to the desolate northern Alaskan ranges. There, devoid of towns or villages, lies a pristine wilderness. In this icy world, transportation is challenging. Cars are useless. Only planes can navigate. Local hunters typically own a small plane, though flying involves many considerations due to the extreme environment. Today, Maddie prepares for his first flight of the year. With the ground already snowy, he swaps the plane's tires for skis for a snowy landing. The flight will take about 3.5 hours. With the temperature not too low yet, Maddie seizes the opportunity to head to the hunting area, as colder temperatures increase flying risks. After packing his equipment, Maddie returns indoors to enjoy the last of winter's warmth with his family. He then pulls out a map, explaining his plans to his wife. He points out his landing spot and instructs her to call the rescue team if she doesn't hear from him within a set time, and to consider remarrying with their daughter. His wife, accustomed to such talks, simply nods in understanding. Then, Maddie flew the plane towards his destination. 3 hours later, he was above the target area. Since the skis had no brakes, he had to rely on gliding to slow down. Fortunately, the plane landed smoothly. Just as he secured the plane, Maddie discovered a clear set of footprints, indicating a rich diversity of wildlife in the area. He then headed towards the hunter's cabin, gripping his shotgun tightly. This period is active for grizzly bears and wolves, so Maddie was extremely cautious with every step. Soon, he reached the cabin but didn't rush inside. Instead, as a precaution, he circled the cabin to observe. He then checked the nail board he left as an alarm system. Some nails were bent, suggesting that some creature, likely a curious brown bear, had visited the cabin. After ensuring no immediate danger inside, Maddie entered the cabin and hung up a drawing from his daughter, a reminder of home for the coming days. Over the next period, Maddie would traverse the wilderness to set and check traps. This area was vast, necessitating his second mode of transportation, a snowmobile. As dusk fell, Maddie set up an antenna outside to receive signals from a radio station hundreds of miles away and to send messages of safety to his wife. Living alone in this icy landscape, loneliness and solitude were constant companions, and the longing for family grew stronger with each passing day. The first task of the day for Maddie was to store a sufficient amount of fresh water. Before setting out, he needed to consume enough calories to stay warm, as the Alaskan temperatures were extremely low and active outdoor work required maintaining body heat to prevent hypothermia. After eating and drinking, Maddie started inspecting the snowmobile, which had been with him for many years and was showing signs of wear. His hunting area was extensive, and to avoid breakdowns, Maddie planned to perform a comprehensive maintenance on the snowmobile after fetching water. His water source was a river called Squirrel River, the nearest freshwater river to his cabin. The river's surface was already covered with a thick layer of ice. Despite this, Maddie drove carefully over it, aware that the combined weight of the vehicle and himself exceeded 600 pounds. If an area wasn't fully frozen, Maddie could potentially fall in taking an unwanted bath, and might even have to bid farewell to his wife. He soon reached his usual water collection point and began breaking the ice with his tool, using the sound to locate thinner ice layers where fresh water was easier to access, but also riskier. After filling 2 buckets with water, he returned to the cabin to repair his snowmobile. Being a hunter meant being self-reliant, skilled in using and maintaining all tools. After replacing the worn-out parts, a startling incident occurred. Maddie accidentally caused a fuel leak from the snowmobile. With the fireplace still burning inside his wooden cabin, this posed a serious fire risk. Fortunately, after a quick cleanup, he managed to prevent any disaster. Testing the snowmobile post-repair, it ran smoothly. With preparations complete, it was time for Maddie's hunting. His extensive route required a full day, so he planned to start early the next morning. He had set 150 traps across the hunting area and aimed to check them all in one day, a daunting task. Reaching the first trap, he found it triggered but empty, though numerous animal tracks nearby indicated activity. This was somewhat encouraging. He reset the trap and moved to the next. However, this trap was also empty. And worse, he found wolf tracks nearby. Without his shotgun, Maddie worried about the possibility of a wolf pack encounter. Knowing his snowmobile might not ensure a quick escape, his fear grew, and just as he decided to leave the area, his snowmobile chose to malfunction, frustrating him immensely. It turned out to be a spark plug issue, but thankfully, he had spare parts. After replacing the spark plug, the snowmobile started up again, and he continued on his route to check the remaining traps. As time passed, it quickly became dark. Now Maddie could only rely on the weak light of his snowmobile to navigate. But then, after a long day of work, the snowmobile engine cut out again. This time, the snowmobile completely broke down. No matter how many spark plugs Maddie changed, it just wouldn't start. He felt a chill as he realized he was 16 kilometers from his cabin. Without his vehicle, he had no choice but to walk back. But in the dark Alaskan night, the risks were significantly higher. Whether Maddie could safely return to his cabin remained uncertain. Tom and Will had gone hunting and hadn't returned home by nightfall, which left Nancy alone and very worried about Tom's safety. The darkness in the deep forest posed greater dangers than nature itself. Nancy could only stay inside and silently pray for his safety. Fortunately, the wait wasn't long, and Tom returned home safely. Although he hadn't caught anything that day, to Nancy, that didn't matter. His safe return was enough. She then served a carefully prepared dinner. The next day, an old friend named Tim visited Tom's home. He had been Tom's friend for over 20 years. That morning, Tim sought Tom's help with a problem. Beavers had arrived at the pond near Tim's home and were building dams on the drainage outlets, causing the pond's water level to rise, slowing down the river flow and increasing the microorganisms in the water, which posed a safety hazard for their domestic water use. Tom agreed to help Tim after learning about the situation. After all, he was skilled at catching beavers. This would not only help his friend, but also provide beaver meat and pelts, a win-win situation. The next day, Tom took the traps he had prepared and drove to the pond Tim mentioned. The shoreline was slippery and covered with snow, making walking risky. Tom cautiously made his way along the shore. Soon, he found the drainage outlet frequently visited by beavers. He then set the powerful traps he had brought, which Nancy had always opposed because of their danger, and because Tom was no longer the young man he used to be. After clearing the outlet, Tom installed the traps. If the beavers came to build a dam there, the traps would catch them. Tom set several similar traps and then patiently waited for the prey to come. Soon after, as heavy snow began to fall, Tom, confident in his traps, called Will over to show him. After a hopeful harvest, Tom found all his traps empty, a slap in the face. He analyzed the situation and concluded that the heavy snowfall had likely frozen the drainage outlet, preventing the beavers from reaching the traps. He would have to wait for the ice to melt for another chance to catch them. After informing Tim of the situation, Tom planned to return in a few days. Days passed, and Tom began rechecking the traps. Many beaver tracks indicated recent activity. If nothing unexpected happened, he was sure to have a catch. Unfortunately, the first trap was not triggered, but Tom remained hopeful for the others. His persistence paid off as he caught 2 beavers. Thrilled by his success, beaver pelts could be sold, and the meat stored for winter, making this a significant gain. He brought his bounty to Tim, who was delighted as the threat to his water source was finally addressed. In gratitude, Tim invited Tom to a duck hunting event in a few days, an offer no seasoned hunter would refuse. Tom accepted and took the beavers home to prepare for the upcoming hunt. Meanwhile, Maddie, having replaced several spark plugs to no avail, had to put on snowshoes and walk back to his cabin. The Alaskan night posed severe dangers, not just from the freezing temperatures, but also from active wolf packs. The journey was perilous, with thick snow making walking difficult. Despite wearing snowshoes, Maddie often slipped, slowing his progress and rapidly depleting his energy. Before long, he began to sweat, and to prevent his clothes from getting soaked, he stopped frequently to rest, as wet clothes would not keep him warm. However, dehydration was his worst problem. The extreme cold in Alaska meant that any carried water would freeze instantly, so Maddie hadn't brought any drinking water. Although he could eat snow to quench his thirst, he avoided it because it would lower his core temperature and increase his risk. Now, he could only hope for the best. Hours passed, and an exhausted Maddie was still 4 kilometers from his cabin. The howling of wolves in the distance reminded him of the constant danger. 3 hours into his walk, his situation seemed bleak. He felt his body reaching its limits and thought he might die. Overwhelmed by despair, he began to think irrationally, imagining his wife remarrying and his child calling someone else Dad. These thoughts jolted Maddie awake, driving him to keep moving. He couldn't let his daughter call someone else Dad. Suddenly, Maddie felt a surge of strength and managed to reach the hunter's cabin using this newfound energy. Once inside, his first action was to drink water. After briefly quenching his thirst, thoughts of the snowmobile's issues came flooding back, a feeling Maddie found utterly frustrating. After a night of rest, he took a new engine and set out early in the direction of the broken snowmobile. The path was the same as last night, but it was easier to navigate during the day. After 2 hours of travel, Maddie reached the snowmobile to replace the engine. However, the extreme cold made his fingers numb and stiff, unable to turn the screws. He had to stop to build a fire to warm his hands before continuing the repair. Familiar with the snowmobile due to years of use and maintenance, he soon completed the replacement and successfully started the motor. He then rode the snowmobile back towards the cabin. Yet, accidents are often unexpected, and just 2 miles out, the snowmobile broke down again. Upon inspection, Maddie found the steering column had broken. He wondered if he had bad luck, as one misfortune followed another. Fortunately, this issue wasn't severe. He managed to temporarily fix the skis with wood and continued his journey. After these struggles, Maddie finally made it back to the cabin. The beginning of his stay had been marked by various misfortunes, reflecting life's unpredictable nature. You never know whether surprises or accidents will come first. Winter had arrived in Montana, and Tom was preparing for the season. He had previously caught 2 substantial beavers, but this was not enough to last the entire winter. He was invited to Tim's duck hunting event today and brought along his beloved dog, Ellie, primarily to retrieve ducks from the water. Ellie, originally a German short-haired pointer, is a versatile hunting dog suited for various challenging tasks on land and water. However, this was Ellie's first time performing in water, and Tom was unsure how well she would perform. As the small boat drifted down the river, the old hunter Tom stood at the bow with his gun ready. Soon, the noise stirred up several wild ducks, and Tom shot one down. Ellie, obediently following Tom's command, jumped into the water. But since it was her first water task, Ellie, after retrieving the duck, didn't know how to get back to the boat. 10 minutes passed, and Ellie had not returned, causing growing anxiety among the crew. Given the river's low temperature, even a hunting dog could not stay in the water for long. To prevent any accidents, the group quickly went ashore to bring her back. After ensuring Ellie's safety, they continued the hunting activity. Unbeknownst to them, a blizzard was approaching. The previously sunny sky soon gave way to heavy snowfall, forcing the duck hunting to a halt, and the group retreated to Tim's residence. However, at this time, Tom decided to go into the mountains to set some traps before returning home. His current meat stores were not enough to last the entire winter. If he didn't prepare enough food early, obtaining food would become increasingly difficult as the weather worsened. This decision kept him away longer than expected, causing Nancy, who was alone at home, to worry even more about Tom's safety. Adding to her concerns, she found grizzly bear tracks near their home while going to the bathroom. After much thought, she decided to call Tim to check on the situation. Through Tim, she learned that Tom had gone into the mountains without telling her. Tim also felt uneasy because it had been over 3 hours since Tom left, and he should have been back by then. After reassuring Nancy, Tim could no longer sit still. He grabbed his shotgun and rushed into the blizzard. The snow grew heavier, and despite calling out, Tim received no response, which worried him deeply. Remembering that Tom had followed the river, Tim decided to search along it. Fortunately, this method worked quickly, and soon he heard Ellie's barking. Relieved to find Tom safe and sound, Tim couldn't help but complain, emphasizing that despite Tom's experience, he should consider the feelings of others. In the remote northern Alaskan mountains, Maddie often thought of his wife and child. He communicated with them through messages on the radio and a drawing by his daughter on the wall. Today, he received a new message. His daughter had a dance performance this weekend, a pivotal moment in her life. Maddie did not want to miss it, so he decided to rush back by the only means available: plane. Flying home was undoubtedly a gamble with his life, but the weather seemed favorable in the next few days, giving him some confidence. However, before heading home, Maddie needed to check all the traps he had set. His snowmobile had been unreliable, leaving him frustrated. He soon reached the first trap, but unfortunately, it was empty. Clearly, this was not a good start, as he still had many traps to check today. So, Maddie didn't delay and immediately headed to the next trap. Each trap was spaced far apart, and he knew he couldn't finish early today. He just hoped his snowmobile wouldn't cause any more trouble. As one trap after another turned up empty, Maddie's once good mood began to sour. He could only hope as he moved to the next trap. However, unexpected issues arose when his snowmobile got stuck in the snow. Frequent strong winds in Alaska often buried the paths he had cleared, leading to frequent snowmobile entrapments. Fortunately, the snowmobile didn't completely break down, and after freeing it from the snow, Maddie continued checking the traps. As time ticked by, dusk fell. Maddie reached the last trap and finally, luck was on his side. A marten lay in the trap. After many days, Maddie had broken his streak of no catches. Although the marten wasn't worth the day's fuel cost, a catch was still better than none. The next day brought heavy snow, delivering a blow to Maddie, who was planning to return home. But could this stop him? Certainly not. He reached the airfield, and to ensure the plane could take off, he compacted the snow on the runway with his snowmobile. After finishing the preparations, Maddie decided to take the risk. This act was undoubtedly gambling with his life. As the plane slowly ascended, Maddie raced against death. The sky was overcast, and his old plane lacked a navigation system, increasing the risks. Fortunately, with some luck, after 3 hours of a life-or-death race, Maddie arrived over his home. Hearing the plane's roar, his wife and daughter ran outside. Seeing his daughter, Maddie felt all his efforts were worthwhile. Today, Tom and his wife received a call from their daughter. The call was not only to check on their health, but also to persuade them to leave the mountain life behind. Living in the mountains was not like the city. They had to hustle daily and be cautious of predators. Clearly, their daughter was very worried about their safety. Given their age, it was time for them to enjoy their later years. This wasn't the first time she had made such a call. Each time she invited them to live in the city and enjoy life, Tom had refused, preferring the mountain life over the city. Despite her frustration, the daughter's persuasion this time seemed to shake Tom's resolve. He knew he was no longer young and needed to consider Nancy's well-being. So, Tom asked his daughter to give him some time to think. That day, he also received a letter from an old friend. The letter stated that Jack wanted to invite Tom and Will to go hunting at Ada River. They hadn't seen each other for over 10 years. Although Jack sent an invitation every year, Tom was always too busy with his hunting season to accept. But this year was different. His daughter's call had planted the idea of leaving the mountains, so he decided to use this opportunity to clear his mind and think about his future. Thus, he and Will set off for Ada River. After several hours of travel, they arrived at Jack's farm. Jack's lifestyle was slightly different from Tom's, relying mainly on livestock for his income, with hunting as a hobby. Jack's farm appeared beautiful, but was fraught with dangers, occasionally visited by mountain lions and brown bears. This time, a mountain lion was lingering on the edge of the farm. Jack seized the opportunity to ask Tom and Will to help drive it away. The two friends readily agreed and set off on horseback. Soon, they reached the area where the mountain lion was often spotted. As they joked and searched the area, the horses suddenly became restless. It turned out they had spotted the mountain lion hiding in the bushes. Surprised by the presence of 3 formidable men, the mountain lion quickly fled towards the mountains. The group had thought it would be difficult to drive away the mountain lion, but it turned out to be quite timid. With the threat gone, it was time for Jack to showcase his talents. Jack was also a falconer, and today he was going to demonstrate falcon hunting to Tom and Will. The helmeted star of the show was Yuji, known as the Bullet of the Sky for his speed. Before setting out, Jack weighed him to ensure he could handle the weight of a grouse. How exactly he calculated this, if anyone knows, feel free to explain in the comments. The area was teeming with grouse. Jack released Yuji, and the hunting dogs waited below, ready to act. Once Yuji hit his target, the dogs would retrieve the prey and bring it to Jack. However, in his debut, Yuji missed his target. It seemed he was not as formidable as rumored. But for Tom and Will, the hunting experience was an eye-opener. After a day of activities, Tom found the answer he was looking for. Compared to city life, he still preferred the tranquil days in the mountains. Recently, brown bears had been frequently seen outside Tom's home. Even more alarming, the previous night, a hungry bear had attacked Tom's pigeon coop. Fortunately, The coop was sturdy enough and suffered minimal damage. After returning from his heart-clearing trip with his old friend Jack, Tom decided to continue living in the deep mountains. He and Nancy were already accustomed to this lifestyle. However, their life recently has not been as peaceful as imagined. The recent incident with the brown bear served as a wake-up call for Tom. Since brown bears are legally protected and Tom lacked a hunting permit, he found himself in a dilemma. To address this concern, Tom ultimately sought help from local law enforcement. John, the local sheriff, is primarily responsible for protecting the locals from bears. After receiving Tom's call for help, John drove straight to Tom's home. Based on Tom's description, the grizzly bear tracks, and the claw marks on the pigeon coop, John estimated that it was a very large bear, weighing around 400 pounds. Since John had no better solution at the moment, he could only suggest that Tom install a higher voltage electric fence around his home to try to prevent the bear's intrusion. Aside from hunting, Tom had another skill. He was a professional at skinning game. After processing the skins, others would take the meat, and Tom kept the skins, which he crafted into leather shoes and other handmade items to sell in specialty stores. Due to his expert craftsmanship, Tom was well known in the region. Local hunters often thought of him first for their skinning needs. Today, his neighbor Charlie approached him. Charlie had hunted a deer and wanted Tom to skin it. Skinning a deer is a meticulous and tedious task, taking about an hour for one deer. However, processing deer skin near his home was very dangerous because the blood and scent could attract predators, especially with a brown bear nearby. Nonetheless, as a professional, Tom had to take this risk. Tom was very skilled, and it didn't take long to process the deer skin. To preserve the leather better and enhance its value, Tom still had much work to do. However, Tom wasn't in a hurry to deal with the deer skin at the moment. Instead, he and Will decided to go hunting in the mountains because their winter meat storage was insufficient, and being stirred by his neighbor Charlie made them restless. They used their usual method. Will knocked on deer antlers to make noise and attract male deer, while Tom stood ready with his gun to deliver a fatal shot. But while they were focused, a strange noise suddenly sounded nearby. It was the first time either of them had heard such a sound, which startled them. Fortunately, as experienced hunters, they carefully analyzed the situation and concluded that it was probably the wind blowing through the trees. After realizing the source of the friction noise, Tom and Will's tension eased. Since they started late today, it was already getting late, so they decided to stop for the day and return tomorrow. What Tom didn't know was that another threat was approaching his home. Nancy found fresh wolf tracks near their residence. Wolves are social animals and can be more dangerous than bears when they target something. The more Nancy thought about it, the more frightened she became, so she quickly called Ellie back and hurried into the house. Now, with bears in front and wolves behind, Tom faced new crises. Meanwhile, in the northern wilderness of Alaska, Maddie was back. Last time, he risked his life flying home for his daughter's dance recital. Yet, to support his family, he had to leave the warmth of his home and return to the Alaskan wilderness to continue his trapping career. Today, he received some unwelcome news. A blizzard was expected tonight, which would cover the hunting trails he had developed in deep snow. This meant he might face being stuck in the snow again with his snowmobile. Despite this, Maddie was determined to check all his traps today, facing a very busy day. However, Maddie's luck was as bad as ever. Not far out, a fallen tree blocked his path. He couldn't stop, so he planned to bypass it by taking an undeveloped path over another hillside, which was very risky. If he hit something, the consequences could be fatal. But Maddie couldn't worry about that now. He was racing against time. Unfortunately, what he feared happened. Traveling too fast, he crashed into a tree lying across the path, flipping over. Not only did this not save time, but it also wasted more. He had to manually move his several hundred-pound snowmobile. Fortunately, it wasn't buried too deep, and he managed to move it after a few minutes. Maddie didn't dare rest and immediately continued riding forward. The next scenes only brought him despair. Trap after trap was empty, yielding no catch. If things continued this way, Maddie's family might end up with nothing. A day passed, and no miracle occurred. Maddie returned home empty-handed. Despite this setback, he remained optimistic and treated himself to a hot bath.